The hardest part of being a part of that world of drugs, crime, and violence is not having anyone you can trust. You're constantly looking over your shoulder. And if you think that person's your best mate, you have another thing coming, because they can stab you in the back just as quickly as they can blink. My name's Jess and I'm 36, and I am a mentor for people within the community that are going through the system. I was born in a little suburb in Western Sydney called Erskine Park. It was a really sought after area back in the day, and we moved in there when I was 5 years old into a brand new 4-bedroom home in a cul-de-sac. It was like your picture perfect, little family, mum, dad, and brother. And I lived this really idyllic life that we were a part of the local football club for many years. Mum was a local preschool teacher and taught generations of kids within Erskine Park. And we had a really great upbringing, riding bikes, making dirt jumps over in the park. Our coming home time was when the lights went on. We weren't a part of the generation of the internet. So I believe I had a really, really good upbringing. Street parties, Christmas parties. But it was starting to go pear-shaped from a really young age as well. So I was quite different to the kids in the community, and Mum could see that my behaviour was very different, and because she worked with so many kids, she could really see that my personality was different. She just didn't know what. And even as a preschool teacher with education, they didn't even talk about mental health or ADHD or, all these possible factors that could have been why I was displaying really unusual characteristics at a young age, like hiding my 2-year-old brother in the big W racks. I would hide him and then tell my mum we'd lost him. And I'd just do it for shits and giggles because I thought it was funny. I just always wanted to be someone else but me. I hated the way I looked. I felt like I wasn't pretty enough. And I always had these really high expectations of myself. What didn't help was that I came out when I was 15 and I put myself in the line of fire. Coming out as a lesbian 20 years ago in an all-girls Catholic school was not the highlight of my life. I would never wish what I went through upon anyone. But I stuck to my guns. I didn't let what others said about my lifestyle deter me. I wasn't aware about my mental health until I was 23. We didn't have a name for what I was doing other than I was a naughty kid. I was constantly being told that there was something wrong with me, that I don't know why you're like this, Jessica. Why do you do this, Jessica? Why can't you just listen, Jessica? That came from teachers to my parents, to my loved ones, to my nana. My nana used to say, why don't you ever just shut up? Like, you just talk and talk and talk. They just couldn't understand, even though they should have, because my dad's mother was actually institutionalized majority of her life for manic depression. So they hadn't had a lot of interactions with mental health. I think as parents, they just didn't want to accept or acknowledge that there was something severely wrong. So at 23, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 1 and 2. Being told that I could be possibly having a manic episode, that my behavior and my choices were a reflection of my mental health, not who I was actually as a person. Because I've always prided myself on being a good person, I just made bad choices. And I didn't really know what those bad choices would lead to. By 17, I was dating a 28-year-old heroin addict. And she gave me an insight into heroin and Cabramatta. I went to my first methadone clinic at 17. So even though I was living with my best friend's family, I was no longer in school. I was working 2 jobs, and I had this heroin addicted partner who was showing me a world I knew nothing about. Really opened my eyes up quite young to that world, and I'm so blessed and so grateful she came into my life to educate me on that, because no one else would have. But unfortunately, she never warned me about meth, or shabu back in those days as it was called, when I first started using. And from that first moment in my lounge room in Moody Hill at the townhouse I'd bought, I still remember it like it was yesterday. My mate, who I'd been friends with since I was 16, was actually my boss in real estate. Brought the sunglasses case in and said, "Don't worry, Jess, it's exactly like speed, but better." And I trusted him. My girlfriend at the time trusted him. So by this stage, I'd ruined the 5-year relationship I'd been in, and I was with another girlfriend. It was just one whirlwind of one relationship after another. It was like I just couldn't keep it together. But somehow people still thought I did. I could never understand how they thought that I was actually okay. But I think the people closest to me knew. But because it was so far outside of their norm, they just couldn't comprehend what was going on. Yeah, 23 is where it really kicked off. I sold my house, sold my car, and the profits from the house were all gone within 3 to 6 months. We've blown it all. That's the impulsive spending from the mental health, which by this time I had no idea. I had no idea that me just going, I'm gonna buy a house today, and going and buying a house, or I'm gonna buy a car today, and that happening was all a part of my mental health. There was no structure to my thinking at all. And I used to say, I'm a doer, not a gunner. When I say I'm gonna do something, I do it. And that was because I was impulsive. I had no consequential thinking. And so when anyone would put anything in front of me, I wouldn't think, I'd just do it. And yeah, that went on to the beginning of the downfall. So I was on meth from the age of 23 until I spent my 28th birthday in a jail cell. So for around 7 years, 6, 7 years, it's a really big blur. I say to people it may have only been 6, 7 years, but it actually feels like 15 years because you're up for 24/7. Like you can spend 2 to 3 weeks up, especially in those early days when the shabu was chronic. You know, you would have a small amount and you'd be awake for 2 weeks. But that changed really quickly as well. You know, I went from only having a little bit to copious amounts within months. You know, I started committing crimes during that time to support my habit. I was in a lot of sink or swim moments. I was under investigation a number of times by the police. I went to court for the first time when I was 23, so only a year into using. I was charged with 64 counts. I had been raided out at Wentworthville. It was one of the most mortifying experiences, and that happened in the very beginning. So when I went to that first court hearing when I was 23, a journalist looked up my name and my real estate sales had come up. So they ran with real estate agent charged with fraud 36 charges, so I was quite lucky. Those 64 counts had been dropped to 36 by the time she ran with the article. And due to my last name being so well known within our community, it ended up on the Ray Hadley radio station, in the newspapers, Daily Telegraph, and my parents started getting the phone calls. You know, they tried to keep it secret and hidden because they were so embarrassed. And brought a lot of shame on my family. I come from a huge, Maltese family, and they're all good people, really good people, law-abiding people. So for one of their relatives to be named in the newspaper as someone that's committed fraud was a huge thing, you know. And I have a lot of, I did have a lot of guilt and shame around that. My family's forgiven me and we all moved past it. But it was a hard time for all of us, not just me. I remember my uncle ringing my mum after listening to the Ray Hadley radio station and going, "Oh my God, what has your daughter gotten herself into?" I had uncles telling my cousins not to let me around my baby cousins. So a lot of my cousins tried, and they let me in and, you know, try and talk me, you know, out of the psychosis I was in. So I ended up in quite severe drug-induced psychosis early on. So a lot happened in that first year. Everyone found out quite quickly that I was a meth addict. I couldn't hide it because it was in the newspaper. And one of the conditions was, you know, that I had to go to rehab. And I had already been told about rehab just prior to this by a very unlikely source, my dealer. He could see I was in really bad psychosis. I didn't even know what psychosis was at this stage. I just knew I was so scared and I would not let anyone into my house unless they had weed, and then they were allowed in. And he had weed that day, so he was allowed in. And yeah, I kind of sat and stewed on that for a while, him saying I needed to go to rehab. And again, put it to the back burner until court came and they said, you know, you've got the option of a custodial sentence or go to rehab. And I went home that day and I said to my mum, I want to go to rehab, I want help. And she pushed me off her. And she said, you don't want help. If you wanted help, you'd just stop. So little education she had back then. You know, and that was their idea. You can just stop, Jess. But I just couldn't. And I ended up getting to go to rehab. The craziest part about this story is that my parents went overseas for 3 months just before I went into rehab. They took me up to Nepean Detox and I met these two ladies, Glenda and Vicky, two very scary caseworkers. And they said to my mum, she's insane. She is in a very bad way. We need to get her off the streets. And they got me an emergency bed at a rehab in Sydney and into the detox. They made sure I got from the detox to the rehab while my parents were overseas. So that was my first stint. I went in for 4 months, but the second I knew my parents were home, I ran. And that led to another my first relapse, and it was nasty. It was a really nasty relapse. And from there on in, it was a bunch of relapsing detox, relapse, rehab, relapse, rehab. I did 6 intakes over 7 years. I did multiple detoxes and holding cells. I class the holding cells as a bit of a dry out session because I could be in the holding cells from anywhere for 2 days up to 5. I was in Surrey Hills for 14 days, which was horrendous. So I've literally been in nearly every holding cell possibly across Sydney, and I don't recommend them. I still get anxiety walking into Liverpool Police Station, which I now have to deal with on a weekly basis. And knowing that I've been down in those holding cells, I've been behind those glass doors, I've sat in there freezing my butt off at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, starving. I was out on my own in a world that, quite frankly, scared the crap out of me. I wasn't built for that world. I never was. I just fell into it and learned some really hard lessons. Some stuff that will be with me to the day I die. So the last time I used, and the last time it started with a really bad relapse. I had done a really long stint at rehab, and I'd gotten to transitional. I was in the transition house. I was back with Glenda and Vicky from 8 years earlier, or 7 years earlier. And Glenda was really putting it on me this time. She was being really hard with me, and she really wanted me to succeed. I had a lot happen in that recovery. I lost an auntie really suddenly. I still wasn't dealing with my mental health. I was pretending to. I was putting it onto everyone that I was dealing with it, and that I understood what bipolar meant, and I understood that I needed to take my medication, and I was very good at faking it. And I did that very well. I think Glenda could see through it, but she kept trying because she really did believe in me. And after my auntie died, I reconnected with my ex. She was in jail at the time. She rang me. I don't even know how she'd gotten hold of me. And yeah, it was on pretty much from that moment. I was planning to get out of transitional and get into my own housing unit. I started the process for applying for housing. I was just over a year clean. And I got approved for priority housing. And I moved into the units at Hebersham. My parents seen the place and said, "Don't move in here. Please don't move in here, Jess." And I said, "I'm fine. Look, I'll just stay to myself." Again, I never grew up in housing. So for my parents to see this, it was like, just please stay in transitional. But they didn't know that by this time I was very much back with my ex. And even though I was a part of NA and I was going to meetings, I was meeting up for coffee and doing the whole dinners and everything you're meant to do, a part of NA, again, very much faking it. I was already planning on getting back with my ex. And within 2 weeks of moving into those housing units, I'd moved her in. Within 3 weeks, we'd relapsed. So yeah, 4 weeks after moving into those units, a young man had lost his life, and we were actually the unit above his. And this was someone I'd just shaken his hand. I'd just been in his lounge room. And it was one of the most horrific deaths in Mount Druitt. And yeah, I just, again, I didn't know how to deal with those feelings. I barely knew this guy from a bar of soap, but to know that I'd sat in his lounge room, and then only a few days later he'd lost his life in the next room, was just something I couldn't handle. And for so many years, the meth had me fooled that it could take away my pain. The drugs could take away all the thoughts and all the feelings and all the yuck I just didn't want to feel. But the problem was they'd stopped working. I had too much knowledge by this stage. NA had ruined my using. Rehab had ruined my using. I'd learnt how to control the drug-induced psychosis. Was still very much in manic episodes. Every time I'd relapse, I'd get off my meds straight away. They were the first thing to go. And that was what happened in this relapse. So from the get-go, it was bad. There was a lot of violence in that complex. I went into housing and said, I can't live here anymore. If I don't get out, I'm not going to make it out. And I handed the keys in and went into a women's refuge, but I was just too far gone. I didn't know how to manage my money. I didn't know how to pay the refuge $110 a week when I could use that money on gear. So I chose a flea-infested shed to live in instead. My relapse ended on Bougainville Road in Mount Druitt. On the 19th of April 2016, my mum drove me to the drug den for the last time. And my mum had to walk in on her only daughter using meth for the last time. The look on her face, I'll never forget it. She said, "Get out. Get out now." Then we got in the car, and by this stage I put this woman through hell. My dad, he's a strong man. I've only ever seen him cry a handful of times. And those times have mostly been about me. For him, my mental health was a reflection of him because of his mother. So when I got to that Parramatta courthouse and I knew it still hadn't really sunk in that it was the end of the road. It was the end, I was done. Like I said earlier, I did start using heroin in this last relapse as well. It wasn't for long. I guess I just kind of knew in my heart that I was done. I wanted the line in the sand to stop. I didn't want there to be another line that I had to cross, which meant there could have been another possible relapse. So I rang that ex from 10 years earlier and begged her. And she bought it. And it only was 6 weeks before I got locked up, but I'm so grateful that happened, because when I was sitting in that jail cell, I knew I was done. I'd done everything. And just before I got locked up, Dad said to me, "Jess, either get your shit together by the time you're 30 or don't bother." And it stuck with me as well. I just remember sitting in that jail cell. So on the 11th of May, I turned 28 in that jail cell. And it was my first birthday without my parents or anyone ringing me and saying happy birthday. And even though I'd been using and a terrible person for all those years, people would still say happy birthday. And here I was on my own in a teeny tiny cell on a steel bed, crying because I had no one. And I was detoxing still. I was at the end of the detox, thank God, but it was really horrible. And I wanted it to be different this time. I definitely say my rock bottom was sitting in that jail cell, realizing I'd become nothing. I was literally a number. And I knew I was worth more than that. And this is when all the stuff I had learnt at rehab started to kick in. The consequential thinking, the communicating getting my needs met, actually taking my medication, learning about my mental health. All these thoughts were going through my head. Everything people had said to me over the years, take the cotton wool out of your ears and put it in your mouth, Jess. Your way isn't working. Do whatever they tell you. If they tell you to stand on your head, you stand on your goddamn head. And I was looking around me and looking at how low my life had become, that I was being strip searched, I was being degraded. I no longer even had a name. And honestly, I deserved it all for what I'd done to our communities and the people, innocent people in our communities. But I knew I was better than that. I knew deep down I had good values. I'd learned about acceptance, commitment therapy and rehab and my values. And I learnt that early on in the piece. So like I said, rehab and NA definitely ruined my using because I had knowledge that I could be a better person. I just wasn't ready to stop until this recovery. And I really put the effort in. I got on the drug court program, so I was facing a 5-year custodial sentence, 5 on the top, 2.5 on the bottom. Because by this stage, the courts were done with me. They had had enough. The police just wanted me off the streets. Me and my ex were just menaces. And we were going from the city out to Penrith. It was, a crazy time. And yeah, they had charged me with really some serious charges. And I was that off my face, I didn't care. I was just like, yep, I'm guilty. Yep, send me to wherever you need to. I don't care anymore, I'm done. I was even at Downing Centre Court fighting with my ex-girlfriend in the courtroom. The sheriffs had to drag me out of the courtroom. That's how little care I had. I just wanted to be taken off the streets. And they got me onto the drug court program. Someone in legal aid thought it was a great idea to submit my application or submit my file to the ballot. And my name was drawn. I was given one last chance at rehab. And the rehab I was given a chance at was the one that I was told about by my drug dealer 10 years earlier. And that was my final rehab. And that was through the Salvos. Because Salvos ran rehab, and I was loved back to life by those guys. They showed me some compassion and empathy I've never been shown before in my life. And it really set the foundations for this recovery. I really immersed myself in the program. I applied myself, I connected, I communicated, and I had my needs met. And I stuck it out. I stuck it out for 9 months. It is sad to say, but I actually haven't completed a rehab program. My behaviours always get me kicked out. They are behaviours that I was trying to work on in rehab, so it's surprising that I got kicked out, but I did. And that would then end up in a relapse. But this time, even though I got kicked out, I had the drug court program to fall back onto. And I had those support networks. I had NA, I had Smart Recovery, I had a counsellor, I had friends, I had urines 3 times a week, I had to go to groups, I had to show that I was studying, I had to show that I was applying for jobs to move through each stage. So it was a holistic approach to my recovery, which I had never had in past recoveries. I was 18 months clean, and then my parents finally let me back home. And I stayed with them for a few months, not long. Obviously not being at home for many, many years, I couldn't really stay there for too long. But then I got into the affordable housing scheme. And I honestly think I went through all that in my 20s and as a young person to really help other people. Because I've never forgotten where I came from. I'll never forget how hard it was to be a young person, and I'll never forget how hard it was to navigate that first chapter of adulthood. And if I can give anything back to our community, that would be to help other people navigate the system like I was helped. So today I actually have an amazing relationship with my family. I'm 8 years clean now. 8 years, 5 months clean. And this year I actually went on my first overseas mother-daughter holiday in 36 years. So my mental health has been a huge hindrance on our family unit for many, many years. I asked my mum a few months ago that if she felt that I'd had any manic episodes in the last 8 years, and she said no. She said that she believes that the drugs contributed a lot to my manic episodes and my behaviour. But she believes that I have implemented the tools that I learnt in rehab and have definitely come a long way. And for my mum to say that, that's huge. Like, for so many years, that poor lady just kept saying, there's something wrong with you, how do I help you? And now she's finally gotten to see her only daughter help herself. So I feel like as a family unit, we've definitely come a long way. Me and my brother didn't actually talk for a number of years due to something that happened within our family. And I'd say a good 6 years he didn't talk to me. So now I'm actually allowed in their home. I talk to my brother, we message about presents for my parents. I'm able now to buy gifts for my family, which I wasn't able to do for a number of years. I'm present at all family functions. I was a bridesmaid in one of my cousin's weddings and failed to show up on the day because I was too busy chasing the next high. These days, I wouldn't even dream of not showing up, bridesmaid or not. Yeah, I'm there for the party. Yeah, we have the best relationship these days. I call mum 3 to 5 times a day, the poor thing. The advice I'd give to the 23-year-old me is be safe. I can't stop you from doing what you're about to do, but know that there's serious consequences that come with your choices. And just question everything. I'm quite lucky to work with a lot of young ones these days. And, you know, I don't want young ones to stop having fun. I want them to experience life, but I also want them to do it safely and understand that there is a serious chance that you could fall into addiction. And it doesn't matter if you're from housing or from the elite suburb of the western suburbs, or if you're from North Sydney. This can affect anyone, and if we don't have knowledge around it, then how do we know? What I think Australia can do to tackle the issue of ice is start doing workshops within high schools. I think there needs to be more alternative education, and if the parents aren't going to teach it, or if there isn't a guardian in that young person's life, they need to know, because right now the internet's teaching our kids more than the education department is around some really serious topics. And if someone doesn't step in, the streets are going to take control of our younger generation. If there is anyone struggling out there with addiction, I strongly suggest Ask Izzy, www.askizzy.com.au. It is the best resource for help in your local area, from detoxes to rehabs. There's also NA, AA, GMA, GA, CMA. These are all anonymous groups that can be either done face-to-face or online. There's Smart Recovery as well. These are all resources I have also used. There's also a lot of people online that are doing support groups. Definitely reach out. You're not alone, and there is help out there.